clever gods or God around at that time who knew there was going to be a major catastrophe or problem. And within the tribal histories, that is related through. And, of course, the tribal histories say that a few people survived and life started all over again. And this was worldwide. So Göbekli Tepe could well be a situation where it was built quite deliberately as a safe place to go to, up on a hill, very well drained, with marvelous views. All these things are very important, with the right kind of building materials to do the key job of, and clearly the stones are roof supports. I think everybody now accepts that they are roof supports. People didn't worship in front of them. And I've said earlier, worship comes from the word workshop, and temples come from Tamon or Tamen, which were sacred areas. And our modern ideas of religion and paganism and cults is such utter nonsense. I just get very frustrated when people bring into the subject, as this book called The Genesis Secret by somebody whose name is given as Tom Knox, but I think it could be one or two or three other people. And this was the article on your website, which was reproduced from the Daily Mail.
Yes.
And I actually was given this book by one of my key networkers, and I've actually gone through it. And I'm extremely disappointed. I just feel that the whole thing is a complete scam in order to be able to promote and sell a book called The Genesis Secret. Other people can draw their own conclusions, but it doesn't bear any relationship to the history that I've done my work on over the last 15, 20 years.
How about how about if you look at the carvings, like on the side of the rocks? Do you think that that's just, decorative, or do you think that might maybe have been done even afterwards? This complex could have been used, and as you say, as some kind of shelter basically at that point, but afterwards it must have almost gotten a religious meaning, I guess. If this was a location where people survived a cataclysm, it might have been revered and venerated after that point. You know what I mean?
I think that if we work on the basis of hunter-gatherers in this area, and we also have to look at climate and also look at the relationship to what we call the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas was an incredibly cold period of time from 10,800 to 9,500 BC. And if we look at Abu Huraira and many of the nearby sites, we find that they were living off 60-70% gazelles, for example, hunter-gatherers, one particular gazelle migration. And when agriculture did arrive, or the seed merchant arrived with the bag, then we find that they literally converted to farming, with predominantly farming, within a period of 100 years. But the objects carved are vultures, cranes, ducks, geese. There are lions, spiders, snakes, and scorpions. These are all the kind of things that practical people interested in wildlife and wildlife management, they would all be looking at all these things. And it's a classic indication, in my opinion, and the superior technology of finishing that stonework, carving that stonework. Some of the pillars, roof supports being up to 10 tons in weight. Tallest, I think, is 12 feet, a 65 feet ring of stone out of that limestone. They are all circular houses, without any doubt in my mind, for quite a large population of people who chose that site to work from, or base. There are stone hammers and blades. There is what I call Karsag technology, extraordinary skill in smoothing that stone and carving that stone. There are over 100,000 bone fragments which were clearly butchered and cooked on site. And there was wild game, boar, sheep, and red deer. And my view is that that kind of sophistication certainly would have existed before the great catastrophe. We see it in the cave paintings and drawings and a whole number of objects that we have found. But it's not far from Karsag. And it's my view that there must be, with the technology and the timing here, we've got a very good chance of the people who had gone up to the top of that mountain were people who were aware of Karsag and what was happening at Karsag, and we may well have a party of what I call angels and watchers as the culture bearers, doing their work in surveying, mapping out, looking at the whole area following the great catastrophe, and spreading their influence around in the area. So that seems to make good sense to me. The point about that area of Anatolia is that from the pollen cores we have, and from the bioarchaeological information, that area wasn't a glacial refuge. The glacial refuge for the key plants, the oak, the pistachio, the wiregrasses, the wheats, etc., was in the area around Damascus, quite a small area in Lebanon, in that area of the running down from Damascus to Jericho. And that is a far better candidate for the start of farming, and many of the world's experts have always considered that farming must have started as a single site somewhere in that area, which just takes us back to Karsak. And so we're looking at an outpost. It might have been an observatory. Several people have suggested that the 12 stones and the structure may well have been an important observatory, and we have in the books of Enoch the angels surveying the sun, moon, and stars, going off and measuring, being involved in studying the people, studying the animals, studying the fauna and flora, and it just looks very much like a link of bright, clever people who were the culture bearers from our stories of the Karsak epics, etc.
Do you think that this Indo-European race of people, that they had a global society going, basically, that they have communications and outposts, as you say, almost across the globe, and that there were communication going on between continents at that time as well?
Well, I just urge people to read the books by Lieutenant Colonel L.A. Waddell. Read all his books, please. Also read the books on the ancient American civilizations by Ruth and Hyatt Verrill, V-E-R-R-E-L-L. It's very, very important. They provide a source for many later books that were written to make it clear in my mind that there was one world, and that the senior Aryan Sumerians, Sargon I, for example, and his son Menes and the family over several generations were traveling the world, visiting their colonies all around the world. And we find Sumerian artifacts in the Americas, the links with the Indian tribes, and we find the same at Tiwanaku, and in India we find that Manu is a name used in India, and the Himalayas it's also used not far from Tiwanaku near Lake Titicaca. We've got the Fuente Bowl. There's just an endless list of similarities. And I've got a lovely little drawing in front of me, in fact, of 6 different types of hat, which are all the same type of hat. And I'm going to put, where did you get that hat? And each one of the people wearing those hats is so far, they're just scattered around the world, from the old world, new world. And to suggest that people have the same hat all around the world would suggest they came from the same source.
That's right.
And my Learning from History Part 3, I deal with this question of ships and shipping and knowledge we have of the Sumerians having very efficient ocean-going craft. I think there were 65 different terms for different types of ship within the Sumerian records. And remember, 93 of our English words we speak today are Sumerian words. Look at Waddell and see how he reaches that conclusion.
That's interesting.
And so we do have an extraordinary link between the Vedas and the Sumerian literature, and of course the Eddas, which we talk about as well. Eddas were the epic poems, in the same way that the Vedic material were the epic poems. And they're talking about one and the same thing. They're talking about the great Sumerian civilization which colonized the world. And the stories of them colonizing Britain is clear, around about 4,200, 3,500. We have the story of the Bak-Sing tribes traveling down the Silk Road towards a group going into India and to Tibet, and the key people, Hung Ti and Shen Rong, who is Sagan, going to China around about 2,700 BC.
You think they brought a lot of culture with them to China as well? We know that China has also a long history of a very ancient culture in that sense, but do you think that they were, how should we put it, aided along as well by the help of the Sumerian kings and people?
Well, I do. I think that the point about China is we have Fuxi and evidence of Karsag millet and wheat and barley in China very, very early. We're talking about Fuxi being there 7,000, 7,500 BC, maybe earlier. If you look at the language and writing, if you compare the Sumerian and Chinese lexicon, as Charles Ball did in about 1890, and Terien Lecouperie, who wrote a book called The Western Origins of Chinese Civilization, you find that the Sumerian pictorial texts and the Chinese pictorial texts are almost the same thing, common words, common language. It's absolutely staggering. And it's such good news, I think, to realize that we are all so closely related, emanating from that original, incredible Sumerian civilization, which goes much, much earlier than people claim. It certainly goes back. The dates for Europe now go back to 4,500 BC. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing great towns and cities at 4,500 BC. And then we can push back to Sabi Abiyad. We can eventually get back to Kutlhayak. And you've got a time span between the birth of Christ, if you like, and the restart of civilization at 9,500 BC. There's a lot of big gaps to fill in. And we're now finding the scientific evidence and the archaeological evidence to fill in those gaps. And Göbekli Tepe is a wonderful example of seeing great skills, great specialization, extraordinarily interesting and important site, which, in my opinion, gives terrific weight to all the arguments that Karsag was active at the same time close to Mount Hermon.
Very interesting. And maybe we should just spend the last couple of minutes here then that we have left, Edmund, on talking about, you mentioned briefly a little bit in the first segment about, neurotherapy, the science of basically the brain and how this could help us and aid us. And this is something that you've been looking into recently as well then, and just think that do you think that this could be the root of many, illnesses, or at least as the cure for many illnesses, that we can, with the aid of, you can explain how this is being done, of course, and what you mean by neurotherapy. Many people think of it in terms of, hemisync, for instance, where you actually synchronize the different, the brain halves, with the aid of frequency or sound. But this is what you're talking about is something different. This is with electricity. Is that right?
Yes, it's recognizing that our universe, we have an electrical magnetic universe. And surprise, surprise, we have electrical magnetic people living in it.
Yes.
And so we find that we have a very extraordinary mechanisms within our brain which operate effectively or may malfunction through changes in electrical impulses, waves, etc. Now, Dan Winter is dealing with this subject, and he's introducing the neurotherapy breakthrough on human health at the Stars and Stones Forum. And his website is goldenmean.info. And there's a lot of very important material there, including the work of Marty Wirtz. And this is American-based and extraordinary understanding now that if we balance the various frequencies or brain waves on the three parts of our brain, we can get our bodies and minds to work much better.